Imagine finding a book that was once so important that people quoted it like they quoted the Bible. A book that told amazing stories about angels coming down from heaven, about a man who walked with God and saw incredible things that no human had ever seen before. This book was respected and loved by many people for hundreds of years. Then one day, it disappeared. It was taken out of most Bibles and forgotten by most of the world. This is not a made-up story. This really happened. The book is called the Book of Enoch, and for almost 1,000 years, most people thought it was completely lost forever. Then in the 1700s, explorers found copies of it hidden away in the mountains of Ethiopia. When scholars read it, they could not believe what they found. The Book of Enoch contains some of the most amazing and strange stories ever written. It talks about giant people who lived on Earth long ago. It tells about angels who left their home in heaven and came down to marry human women. It describes trips to heaven and hell that are so detailed they seem like someone actually went there and came back to tell about it. But here is the big question that has puzzled people for hundreds of years. If this book was so important that early Christians quoted from it, and if it contains such incredible information about angels and heaven, why is it not in our Bible today? What made church leaders decide to take it out? And most importantly, what does this mean for us? Today, we are going to explore one of the biggest mysteries in religious history. We will discover what the Book of Enoch really says and how it is different from the Bible we know today. We will learn about angels and giants and heavenly journeys that sound like science fiction, but were written thousands of years ago. We will find out why some churches still include this book in their Bible, while others rejected it completely. Get ready for a journey that will take us back in time to ancient civilizations, to hidden libraries, and to questions that still puzzle scholars today. This is the story of two books, the truths they contain, and the mystery of why they were separated. Two ancient books, two different stories. Before we can understand the differences between the Book of Enoch and the Bible, we need to know what each book actually is. This might seem simple, but it is more complicated than most people think. When we say the Bible, we usually mean the collection of 66 books that most Protestant churches use today. This includes 39 books in the Old Testament, starting with Genesis and ending with Malachi, and 27 books in the New Testament, starting with Matthew and ending with Revelation. But not all Bibles are the same. The Catholic Bible has 73 books, and the Eastern Orthodox Bible has even more. Different churches have included different books throughout history. The Book of Enoch is actually not just one book, but several books written by different people at different times. Scholars call the main one Enoch, or Ethiopic Enoch, because it survived in the Ethiopian language. There is also 2 Enoch and 3 Enoch, but when most people talk about the Book of Enoch, they mean the first one. The Book of Enoch claims to be written by Enoch, who is mentioned briefly in the Bible. In the book of Genesis, we read that Enoch was a man who walked with God, and that God took him without dying like other people. The Bible only gives us a few sentences about Enoch. But the Book of Enoch claims to tell his whole story in amazing detail. According to the Book of Enoch, this man did not just walk with God in some simple way. Instead, he was taken on incredible journeys through heaven and shown secrets that no other human had ever seen. He met angels and archangels. He saw the places where different spirits live. He was shown how the sun, moon, and stars move across the sky. He even saw what would happen in the future. The Bible tells us about many people who had special experiences with God. Moses saw the burning bush and received the 10 Commandments. Isaiah saw God sitting on his throne in the temple. Ezekiel saw strange creatures and wheels full of eyes. But none of these experiences seem as detailed or as long as what the Book of Enoch describes. This creates our first big difference. The Bible usually tells us about people's experiences with God in a simple, direct way. When something supernatural happens, the Bible writers often do not spend a lot of time describing exactly what everything looked like or exactly what was said. But the Book of Enoch is full of incredible details about things that are hard to imagine. For example, when the Bible talks about angels, it usually just tells us what they did or what message they brought. But the Book of Enoch describes what different angels look like, what their names are, what their special jobs are, and even what happened to angels who disobeyed God. It is like the difference between someone telling you, "I saw a beautiful bird," and someone else spending an hour describing every feather, every color, and every sound the bird made. Another important difference is how the books were preserved. The books in our Bible were carefully copied and passed down through many different communities. We have thousands of ancient copies in different languages, and scholars can compare them to make sure we have the original words. But the Book of Enoch survived in only a few places, mainly in Ethiopia, and most of the ancient copies were lost. This means that while we can be very confident about what the original Bible book said, there are more questions about exactly what the original Book of Enoch said. Some parts might have been changed or added to over the centuries. The ancient roots of sacred writing. To understand why the Book of Enoch and the Bible are different, we need to go back in time to see how these books were created. This story begins thousands of years ago, in a world very different from ours. In ancient times, writing was not something that everyone could do. Paper was expensive and hard to make. Most people could not read or write. Only special people called scribes knew how to write, and they were very careful about what they chose to write down. If someone took the time and money to write a book, it was because they thought it contained very important information. The Bible books were written over a period of about 1,500 years by many different people. The oldest parts, like some of the books Moses wrote, might be over 3,000 years old. The newest parts, like some of the letters in the New Testament, were written about 2,000 years ago. During all this time, the Jewish people, and later the Christians, carefully preserved these writings because they believed God had inspired the writers. The Book of Enoch was probably written during a much shorter time period, mostly between 300 and 100 years before Jesus was born. This was a very difficult time for the Jewish people. They had been conquered by other nations, and many of them were asking hard questions about why God allowed bad things to happen to good people. During this time, many Jewish writers began creating books that claimed to be written by famous people from the past. They would write new books and say they were written by Abraham or Moses or Adam or other important people. Scholars call these books pseudepigraphic, which means false writing or writing under a false name. This might sound like lying to us, but in ancient times, it was a common way for writers to honor someone they respected. If a writer had learned important things from studying Moses, for example, he might write a new book and put Moses' name on it as a way of saying, "This is the kind of thing Moses would have taught." Most scholars today believe that the Book of Enoch was written this way. The real Enoch lived thousands of years before the book was written. But writers who respected Enoch and wanted to explore questions about angels and heaven and the future wrote new books and put his name on them. The Bible books, on the other hand, were mostly written by the people whose names are on them, or by people who learned directly from them. When we read the book of Isaiah, most of it really was written by the prophet Isaiah. When we read Paul's letters, they really were written by Paul. There are a few exceptions where scholars debate who wrote certain books, but in general, the Bible books come from the people they claim to come from. This difference in how the books were created helps explain why they were treated differently by early Christians. The Bible books had a clear connection to people who were known to be prophets or apostles. The Book of Enoch, even though it contained interesting and inspiring ideas, did not have the same clear connection to the historical Enoch. Another important difference is how these books were used in religious communities. The Bible books were read regularly in synagogues and churches. They were used for teaching and for worship. People memorized large sections of them. But the Book of Enoch seems to have been used more like a book for special study. It was read by scholars and people who wanted to learn more about angels and heaven, but it was not part of regular worship services. During the time when Jesus lived, both the Bible books and the Book of Enoch were known and respected. Some of the writers of the New Testament seem to have been familiar with the Book of Enoch. The Book of Jude in the New Testament actually quotes from the Book of Enoch directly. This shows that early Christians knew about it and thought it contained some valuable truths. But as the Christian church grew and spread to different countries, church leaders had to make decisions about which books should be considered the most important and authoritative. They had to decide which books would be included in the official Bible and which books, even if they were good and helpful, would not be included. This decision-making process took several hundred years and involved many meetings and discussions among church leaders. It was not done quickly or carelessly. The leaders looked at questions like, was this book really written by who it claims to be written by? Has this book been accepted and used by churches everywhere? Does this book agree with other books that we know are true? Does this book help people understand God better? When they applied these tests to the Book of Enoch, most church leaders decided that while it might contain some helpful ideas, it should not be included in the official Bible. But this decision was not made by everyone everywhere. Some churches, especially in Ethiopia, continued to include the Book of Enoch in their Bible, and they still do today. What makes the Book of Enoch so special? Now that we understand the background, let us explore what the Book of Enoch actually says. Reading this book is like opening a door to a hidden world full of angels, giants, and cosmic journeys that go far beyond anything most people have ever imagined. The Book of Enoch is divided into several main sections, each one telling a different part of Enoch's incredible story. The first section is called the Book of the Watchers, and it contains some of the most amazing and disturbing stories in all of ancient literature. According to this part of the book, there were once a group of angels called Watchers, whose job was to watch over the earth and report back to God about what was happening. But these angels saw human women and thought they were beautiful. They decided to leave their posts in heaven and come down to earth to marry these women. The Bible mentions something like this very briefly in Genesis chapter 6, where it talks about sons of God marrying daughters of men. But the Book of Enoch tells this story in much more detail. It gives us the names of the leading angels who came down. The main one was called Semjaza, and he led 200 other angels in making a promise to each other that they would all do this together. But the story gets much stranger. According to the Book of Enoch, these angels did not just marry human women. They also taught humans things that they were not supposed to know. One angel taught people how to make weapons and armor for war. Another taught women how to make makeup and jewelry. Others taught people about astrology and fortune-telling and magic. The Book of Enoch says that when the angels married human women, their children were giants. These giants were not just tall people, but enormous creatures who were stronger and more violent than regular humans. They began eating all the food that humans had grown, and when that was not enough, they started eating the humans themselves. The earth became filled with violence and evil because of what these angels had done. People were crying out to God for help, so God decided to send a great flood to destroy the giants and cleanse the earth. He also punished the angels who had disobeyed him by binding them in a place of darkness where they would stay until the final judgment. But before the flood came, God chose Enoch to be his messenger. Enoch was told to go to the fallen angels and tell them what their punishment would be. This is when Enoch's amazing journeys began. According to the book, Enoch was taken up into the heavens, where he saw things that no human had ever seen before. He saw the palace where God lives, surrounded by fire and crystal and precious stones. He saw angels who looked like men, but also angels who looked like strange creatures with many faces and wings. Enoch was shown the places where different kinds of spirits live. He saw where the spirits of righteous people go when they die, and where the spirits of wicked people go. He saw mountains of fire and valleys of ice. He saw the places where the winds come from and where the rain and snow are stored. One of the most interesting parts of the Book of Enoch is called the astronomical book. In this section, Enoch is taken on a tour of the heavens and shown how the sun, moon, and stars move. He learns about the calendar and about different seasons. This part of the book shows that whoever wrote it knew quite a bit about astronomy which was very advanced knowledge for ancient times. Another section is called the dream visions, where Enoch has symbolic dreams about the future history of the world. He sees the story of Noah and the flood, but he also sees things that would happen much later, including the coming of a Messiah who would save God's people. The final major section is called the Epistle of Enoch, where Enoch gives advice and warnings to his descendants about how to live righteously. This part of the book talks a lot about the final judgment, when God will punish the wicked and reward the righteous. Throughout all of these sections, the Book of Enoch presents a view of the universe that is much more complex and detailed than what we find in the Bible. It describes multiple levels of heaven, different kinds of angels with specific names and jobs, and a detailed geography of both the heavenly and earthly realms. The book also spends much more time talking about what happens to people after they die. While the Bible gives us some information about heaven and hell, the Book of Enoch describes these places in great detail. It talks about different areas where different kinds of spirits wait for the final judgment. One thing that makes the Book of Enoch especially interesting is how it tries to answer the question that has troubled people throughout history. Why is there evil and suffering in the world? The book's answer is that evil came into the world because angels disobeyed God and taught humans things they should not have known. This is a much more detailed explanation than what we find in the Bible's account of Adam and Eve eating the forbidden fruit. The Book of Enoch also has a lot to say about the end times and the final judgment. It describes in detail what will happen when God finally decides to judge the world and establish his perfect kingdom. These descriptions are often similar to what we find in the Bible books of Daniel and Revelation, but they are much more elaborate and specific. Reading the Book of Enoch is like reading the most incredible fantasy novel ever written, except that the people who wrote it and the people who first read it believed that all of these things really happened. They believed that Enoch really did take these journeys and really did see these amazing things. The familiar stories of the Bible. To understand how different the Book of Enoch is, we need to look at what the Bible actually contains and how it tells its stories. The Bible is a collection of many different types of writing: history books, poetry, wisdom literature, prophecy, letters, and more. But all of these different types of writing share some common characteristics that make them different from the Book of Enoch. The Bible begins with the book of Genesis, which tells the story of how God created the world and everything in it. This story is told in a simple, straightforward way. God speaks, and things come into existence. He creates light, then the sky, then the land and sea, then plants, then the sun and moon and stars, then animals, and finally humans. The Bible does not spend time describing exactly what God looks like or exactly how he creates things. It does not give us details about what heaven was like before creation or what the angels were doing while all this was happening. It simply tells us what happened in a way that focuses on the most important points. When the Bible talks about the same events that the Book of Enoch talks about, it does so very differently. For example, Genesis chapter 6 mentions that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. It also says that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and that these were the heroes of old, men of renown. But the Bible does not tell us the names of these sons of God, or give us details about what they taught humans, or describe what their giant children looked like. It simply mentions that this happened, and then moves on to the story of Noah and the flood. The focus is on God's response to human wickedness, not on the details of how that wickedness originated. This pattern continues throughout the Bible. When supernatural events happen, the Bible usually tells us what we need to know to understand God's character and his relationship with humans, but it does not usually give us elaborate descriptions of the supernatural world. For example, when the prophet Isaiah sees God in the temple, he tells us that God was sitting on a throne, that his robe filled the temple, and that there were 6 winged creatures called seraphim flying around him saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty." But Isaiah does not spend chapters describing exactly what God's throne looked like, or giving us the names of all the seraphim, or telling us about other parts of heaven that he might have seen. When the prophet Ezekiel sees his famous vision of the wheels and the living creatures, he tries to describe what he saw, but he often says things like, "the appearance of," or "something like," because he is trying to describe things that are hard to put into human words. And even though his description is more detailed than most Bible visions, it is still much shorter and less elaborate than the descriptions we find in the Book of Enoch. The Bible also approaches the question of evil and suffering differently than the Book of Enoch does. The Bible's main explanation for evil comes in the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. According to this story, God created humans with the ability to choose between good and evil. When the first humans chose to disobey God, sin entered the world and affected all of creation. This is a much simpler explanation than the elaborate story in the Book of Enoch about angels coming down and teaching humans forbidden knowledge. The Bible focuses on human responsibility and choice, while the Book of Enoch focuses more on supernatural influences. When it comes to life after death, the Bible gives us some information, but much less detail than the Book of Enoch. The Old Testament talks about a place called Sheol, where the spirits of the dead go, but it does not describe this place in much detail. The New Testament talks more about heaven and hell, but still without the elaborate descriptions found in the Book of Enoch. Jesus talked about heaven as his Father's house, with many rooms, and he described hell as a place of fire and darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. But he did not give detailed tours of these places, like Enoch supposedly did. The Bible also approaches prophecy and the end times differently. Books like Daniel and Revelation do contain symbolic visions of the future, and some of these visions are quite detailed and strange, but they are presented as symbolic dreams and visions that need to be interpreted, not as literal tours of heaven like we find in the Book of Enoch. Another major difference is in how the books present their authority. Most Bible books do not spend a lot of time trying to convince readers that they are true, or that the writers had special authority. The writers usually just tell their stories or share their messages and let the content speak for itself. But the Book of Enoch spends considerable time establishing Enoch's credentials as someone who has seen special things and has special authority to speak about heavenly matters. It describes in detail how he was chosen by God and taken on these journeys specifically so he could come back and tell other people what he had learned. The Bible also has a different focus when it comes to practical living. While the Book of Enoch does contain moral teaching, much of it is focused on the cosmic battle between good and evil and on detailed descriptions of future judgment. The Bible certainly talks about these things too, but it spends much more time on practical matters, like how to treat other people, how to worship God, how to live in community, and how to deal with everyday problems. The wisdom books of the Bible, like Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, are full of practical advice about work, relationships, money, and character. The historical books show us how real people struggled with real problems and how God worked in their lives. The letters in the New Testament give specific advice to specific churches about specific problems they were facing. This does not mean the Bible is not interested in supernatural things or future events. It certainly is. But it approaches these topics in a way that is more focused on how they relate to everyday life and to our relationship with God. The Watchers, angels who fell from grace. One of the most fascinating and disturbing stories in the Book of Enoch is the tale of the Watchers. This story is so central to the book that it deserves special attention, because it shows us just how different the Book of Enoch's worldview is from what we find in the Bible. According to the Book of Enoch, the Watchers were a special class of angels whose job was to watch over the earth and humanity. They were stationed in heaven, but they could see everything that was happening on earth. Their role was something like heavenly guards or observers who would report back to God about what humans were doing. For a long time, the Watchers did their job faithfully. But as they watched humanity, they began to develop feelings that angels were not supposed to have. They saw human women and found them beautiful. They began to desire not just to watch humanity from a distance, but to come down and experience human life themselves. The Book of Enoch tells us that the leader of these angels was named Semjaza, though some versions call him Shemihaza. Semjaza knew that what he was thinking about doing was wrong. He knew that angels were not supposed to leave their posts in heaven, and certainly were not supposed to marry human beings. But his desire was stronger than his sense of duty. Semjaza was afraid to act alone, so he convinced 199 other Watchers to join him. The book gives us the names of many of these angels, including Azazel, Armaros, Barakel, Kokabel, Ezekiel, Asbiel, and many others. Each of these names has a meaning related to some aspect of divine power or knowledge. Before they descended to earth, these 200 angels made a pact with each other. They swore an oath that they would all do this together, so that no one could back out and leave the others to face punishment alone. They knew they were choosing to rebel against God, but they thought that if they all did it together, somehow the consequences would not be as bad. The book tells us that they came down to earth on Mount Hermon, which is a real mountain on the border between Israel and Lebanon. This detail makes the story feel more real and historical, even though what happens next is extraordinary. Once on earth, The Watchers did not just marry human women. They also began teaching humans knowledge that had previously been known only in heaven. This is where the story becomes especially interesting, because it presents a very different explanation for how human civilization developed. According to the Book of Enoch, most of the technologies and knowledge that humans developed were not discovered through natural learning and experimentation. Instead, they were taught to humans by these fallen angels, and this is why they led to evil and violence. Azazel, one of the most important fallen angels, taught humans how to make weapons. He showed them how to make swords and knives and spears and shields. Before this, according to the book, humans did not know how to make tools for war. Azazel also taught humans how to make jewelry and cosmetics, and how to use dyes to color their clothing. Other Watchers taught different things. Armaros taught humans how to break spells and counter magic. Barakel taught astrology, so humans could try to predict the future by looking at the stars. Kokabel taught the signs and omens that people could read in the movement of the stars and planets. Ezekiel taught humans about clouds and weather patterns. Aspiel taught humans about the phases of the moon. At first, this might sound like the Watchers were doing something good by teaching humans all this knowledge. But according to the Book of Enoch, this knowledge was not meant for humans to have. It was supposed to remain in heaven. When humans learned these things before they were spiritually ready for them, it led to disaster. The knowledge of weapon making led to war and violence. The knowledge of astrology and fortune-telling led people away from trusting in God and toward trusting in magic and superstition. The knowledge of cosmetics and jewelry led to vanity and sexual immorality. Even the knowledge of natural things like weather patterns was harmful because it gave humans a sense of power and control that made them forget their dependence on God. But the problems did not stop there. The marriages between the Watchers and human women produced children, and these children were not normal humans. They were giants, called Nephilim, who grew to enormous size and had superhuman strength. The Book of Enoch describes these giants as being 300 cubits tall, which would be about 450 feet. This is obviously an exaggeration, but it shows how the book wanted to emphasize that these were not just unusually tall people, but creatures that were fundamentally different from normal humans. These giants had enormous appetites. They ate all the food that humans had grown and raised. When that was not enough, they began eating the humans themselves. They also ate birds and animals and fish until there was almost nothing left on Earth. The giants also learned the forbidden knowledge that their fathers had brought from heaven, and they used this knowledge to oppress and terrorize normal humans. They became warlords and tyrants who ruled over humanity with violence and cruelty. According to the Book of Enoch, it was this situation that led God to decide to send the Great Flood. The earth had become so corrupted by the influence of the fallen Watchers and their giant offspring that the only solution was to wash it clean and start over with Noah and his family. But before the flood came, God sent Enoch as a messenger to the Watchers. Enoch was told to go to them and explain what their punishment would be. The watchers would be bound in darkness until the final judgment day. Their giant children would be destroyed in the flood, and they would have to watch as all the evil they had introduced into the world led to suffering and death for countless human beings. The watchers asked Enoch to pray for them and ask God for mercy, but God's answer was that there would be no forgiveness for them. They had known exactly what they were doing when they chose to rebel, and the consequences of their actions were too severe for mercy. This story of the Watchers is important because it provides the Book of Enoch's main explanation for why there is evil and suffering in the world. According to this view, humans were originally innocent, but they were corrupted by supernatural beings who taught them things they should not have known and showed them desires they should not have had. This is very different from the Bible's explanation, which focuses on the free choice that Adam and Eve made to disobey God's simple command not to eat from one particular tree. The Bible's story makes humans responsible for bringing sin into the world, while the Book of Enoch's story makes fallen angels responsible. Both stories are trying to answer the same basic question about why the world is full of suffering and evil when God is supposed to be good and all-powerful. But they give very different answers, and these different answers lead to different ways of thinking about human nature, spiritual warfare, and God's plan for dealing with evil. Enoch's journey through the heavens. After Enoch delivered God's message of judgment to the fallen watchers, his real adventures were just beginning. According to the Book of Enoch, God chose this faithful man to take the most incredible journey any human had ever taken. Enoch was brought up into the heavens to see things that were normally hidden from human eyes. The book describes Enoch's journey in amazing detail, as if someone had actually taken this trip and come back to write a travel guide to heaven. Reading these descriptions is like reading the most incredible science fiction story ever written, except that ancient people believed this really happened. Enoch's journey began when he was lifted up from the earth by angels. He describes being carried higher and higher until the earth became small beneath him. Then he began to see things that no human had ever seen before. The first thing Enoch encountered was what the book calls the first heaven. This was a place where he saw storehouses containing snow and hail and rain and dew. He learned that these weather patterns were not just natural events, but were controlled by angels who had specific jobs to do. There were angels in charge of the snow, angels in charge of the rain, angels in charge of the wind, and angels in charge of every other aspect of weather. Enoch was shown how the angels would open the storehouses at the right times to send rain or snow or hail down to earth. He learned that what humans experience as weather is actually the result of a complex heavenly organization with different angels responsible for different aspects of nature. As Enoch continued his journey, he was taken to higher levels of heaven, where he saw even more amazing things. He saw the paths that the sun and moon follow as they move across the sky. He learned that these heavenly bodies are guided by angels and that their movements follow precise patterns that were established by God at the creation of the world. The Book of Enoch spends a lot of time describing what Enoch learned about astronomy during his heavenly journey. He was taught about the 365-day solar calendar and about how the movements of the sun and moon determine the seasons and the holy days. This part of the book shows that whoever wrote it had quite advanced knowledge of astronomy for ancient times. Enoch also saw the places where different kinds of spirits go after death. He was shown 4 different areas where the spirits of dead people wait for the final judgment. One area was for the spirits of righteous people who were comfortable and happy as they waited for their reward. Another area was for the spirits of people who had been murdered, who were crying out for justice. A third area was for the spirits of people who had died natural deaths but had not been particularly righteous or wicked. And the fourth area was for the spirits of the wicked, who were already experiencing punishment as they waited for their final judgment. These descriptions are much more detailed than anything we find in the Bible about what happens immediately after death. The Bible tells us that the dead go to a place called Sheol in the Old Testament or Hades in the New Testament, but it does not usually describe these places in detail or talk about different areas for different kinds of people. As Enoch's journey continued, he was taken to even higher levels of heaven, where he saw the throne room of God himself. The book's description of this place is so elaborate and amazing that it is hard to imagine. Enoch describes a palace made of crystal and fire, with walls that are hotter than flames, but also brighter than snow. He sees a throne that is larger than the sun, and on the throne sits someone whose appearance is more glorious than anything that can be described in human words. Around the throne are thousands and thousands of angels, all praising God and carrying out his commands. In God's throne room, Enoch hears the prayers of righteous people on earth and sees how God responds to them. He also hears the cries of people who are suffering because of the wickedness that the fallen watchers brought into the world, and he sees God's anger about this injustice. One of the most interesting parts of Enoch's journey is when he is taken to see the places where different kinds of angels live and work. He meets the archangels, who are the most important angels and who have special responsibilities for carrying out God's will. The book gives us the names of 7 archangels: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, Raguel, Zerachiel, and Remiel. Each of these angels has specific jobs to do. Michael is the leader of God's army and the one who fights against evil. Gabriel is God's messenger who brings important announcements to humans. Raphael is the angel who heals sickness and injury. Uriel is in charge of God's judgment and punishment of the wicked. Enoch learns from these archangels about God's plans for the future. He is shown what will happen at the end of the world when God finally judges all evil and establishes his perfect kingdom on earth. He sees the final battle between good and evil, the resurrection of the dead, and the punishment of the wicked. The book also describes how Enoch was taken to see the edges of the earth and the foundations of heaven. He saw mountains of fire and valleys of ice. He saw the places where the winds come from and where they go. He saw the roots of the mountains and the sources of the rivers. All of these descriptions show a view of the universe that is very different from what we know today through science. But that was probably similar to how ancient people imagined the world to be, structured. The Book of Enoch presents a universe that is smaller and more organized than we know it really is, but also more supernatural and more directly controlled by spiritual beings. During his journey, Enoch was not just a passive observer. The angels taught him things and gave him messages to bring back to earth. He was told to write down everything he had seen and learned so that future generations would know about these hidden truths. According to the book, this is why Enoch was chosen for this journey in the first place. God needed someone who could travel between heaven and earth, someone who could see the supernatural world and then come back and describe it in words that humans could understand. The Book of Enoch presents Enoch as the first and greatest explorer of the supernatural world. Long before other prophets had visions or dreams about heavenly things, Enoch supposedly took actual trips to heaven and came back with detailed information about how the universe really works. This portrayal of Enoch is very different from how the Bible presents him. The Bible tells us that Enoch walked with God and that God took him so that he did not experience death like other people. But the Bible does not give us any details about what Enoch's relationship with God was like, or what happened to him when God took him. The Book of Enoch fills in all of these details and many more. It turns the mysterious figure of Enoch into a fully developed character with specific experiences and specific knowledge. Whether or not these elaborate stories are historically true, they show us how some ancient people imagined the relationship between heaven and earth and how they thought divine revelation worked. Why the Book of Enoch was left out. Now we come to one of the most important questions in this whole story. If the Book of Enoch was known and respected by many early Christians, if it contains such detailed information about angels and heaven, and if it even gets quoted in the New Testament, why is it not in our Bible today? The answer to this question involves centuries of careful thinking and debate by church leaders, and it helps us understand how the Bible we have today was put together. The process of deciding which books should be included in the Bible is called canonization. The word canon comes from a Greek word that means measuring rod or standard. When church leaders talked about the biblical canon, they were talking about which books met the standard for being considered God's word and which books did not. This process did not happen all at once. Different churches in different places made these decisions gradually over several centuries, and not all churches made exactly the same decisions, which is why different groups of Christians today have slightly different Bibles. When it came to the Book of Enoch, church leaders looked at several important factors. The first and most important factor was authorship. Was this book really written by the person it claimed to be written by? As we discussed earlier, most scholars believe that the Book of Enoch was not actually written by the biblical Enoch who lived before the flood. Instead, it was written much later by people who used Enoch's name to give their writing more authority. This practice was common in ancient times, but it raised questions about whether the book could be considered authentic divine revelation. The Bible books, on the other hand, were generally written by the people they claimed to be written by, or by people who had direct connections to those individuals. The books of Moses were written by Moses, or by people who preserved his teachings. The Psalms were written by David and other known poets and worship leaders. The New Testament books were written by apostles, or by people who worked closely with the apostles. Church leaders felt that for a book to be considered part of God's Word, it should have a clear connection to someone who was known to be a prophet or apostle. Since the Book of Enoch did not have this kind of clear connection, it was harder to accept it as authentic divine revelation. The second factor church leaders considered was widespread acceptance. Had this book been accepted and used by churches everywhere, or was it only popular in certain places? The Bible books had been accepted and used by Jewish communities and Christian churches across many different countries and cultures. The books of Moses were known and respected, not just in Israel, but wherever Jewish people lived. The letters of Paul were copied and shared among Christian churches throughout the Roman Empire. The Book of Enoch, however, seems to have been more popular in some places than in others. It was well known and respected in some Jewish and Christian communities, especially in Ethiopia and some Eastern churches. But it was less well known in the western parts of the Roman Empire, where much of the church's theological development was taking place. Church leaders felt that for a book to be considered part of the universal Bible, it should be recognized and valued by Christians everywhere, not just in certain regions. The third factor was doctrinal consistency. Did this book agree with other books that were clearly accepted as God's Word, or did it contain ideas that contradicted established Christian teaching? This was perhaps the most complex question when it came to the Book of Enoch. The book did contain some ideas that were consistent with biblical teaching. It clearly taught that there is one true God who is holy and just. It taught that there would be a final judgment when the wicked would be punished and the righteous would be rewarded. It taught that people should live moral lives and trust in God. But the Book of Enoch also contained some ideas that made church leaders uncomfortable. Its elaborate descriptions of heavenly geography and angelic hierarchies went far beyond anything found in the Bible. Its detailed explanations of how the universe worked included some things that contradicted what people were learning through natural observation. Most importantly, the book's explanation for the origin of evil placed most of the blame on fallen angels rather than on human choice. This was different from the biblical emphasis on human responsibility and free will. Church leaders worried that if people believed the Book of Enoch's version of events, they might think that humans were not really responsible for their own sins. The fourth factor was practical usefulness. Did this book help ordinary Christians understand God better and live more faithful lives? Or was it mainly interesting to scholars and people who enjoyed speculating about supernatural topics? The Bible books were clearly useful for regular worship, teaching, and spiritual guidance. Christians could read the Psalms when they needed comfort, the Proverbs when they needed wisdom, the Gospels when they wanted to learn about Jesus, and Paul's letters when they needed advice about practical Christian living. The Book of Enoch, while fascinating, was less obviously useful for everyday Christian life. Much of it consisted of elaborate descriptions of supernatural events and places that were interesting, but not particularly helpful for someone trying to figure out how to be a better Christian. Church leaders felt that the books included in the Bible should be books that would help ordinary Christians, not just books that would satisfy the curiosity of people who were interested in supernatural mysteries. There was also a fifth factor that became more important as time went on. As the Christian church spread and grew, it faced challenges from various groups that claimed to have special knowledge or secret revelations that went beyond what was taught in the main Christian churches. Some of these groups used books like the Book of Enoch to support their claims that they had access to hidden truths that regular Christians did not know about. They would point to the elaborate descriptions of heavenly journeys and angelic encounters as evidence that there was much more to divine revelation than what was contained in the commonly accepted Bible books. Church leaders became concerned that including books like the Book of Enoch in the official Bible might encourage this kind of thinking. They wanted the Bible to contain the essential truths that all Christians needed to know, not exotic information that might lead people to think that ordinary Christian faith was somehow inadequate. It is important to understand that when church leaders decided not to include the Book of Enoch in the Bible, they were not necessarily saying that it was completely false or worthless. Many of them recognized that it might contain some valuable insights and that it was certainly an important historical document. What they were saying was that this book did not meet the standards for being considered part of the essential, authoritative Word of God that would be the foundation for Christian faith and practice. This decision was not made quickly or carelessly. It involved discussions and debates among church leaders over many years. Different church councils met to consider these questions, and they looked carefully at the evidence for and against including various disputed books. The decision was also not made unanimously. As we will see in the next section, some churches did decide to include the Book of Enoch in their Bible, and they continue to do so today. But the majority of Christian churches, both in the East and the West, ultimately decided that the Book of Enoch should not be part of the official biblical canon. Churches that still include the Book of Enoch. While most Christian churches around the world decided not to include the Book of Enoch in their Bible, this decision was not universal. There are some churches that have continued to consider the Book of Enoch as part of their biblical canon, and understanding their reasons helps us see how different Christian communities have approached the question of which books are sacred scripture. The most important church that still includes the Book of Enoch in its Bible is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. This ancient church has a long and fascinating history that helps explain why they made a different decision than most other churches. Christianity came to Ethiopia very early, possibly in the 1st century after Christ. According to the Book of Acts in the New Testament, the Apostle Philip baptized an Ethiopian official who had been visiting Jerusalem. This Ethiopian returned to his country and may have been one of the first people to bring Christianity to that region. Because Ethiopia is located in Africa, south of Egypt, the Ethiopian church developed somewhat independently from the churches in Europe and the Middle East. They maintained contact with other Christian communities, but they also developed their own traditions and made their own decisions about various theological and practical questions. One of the most significant differences is that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has a much larger biblical canon than any other Christian church. Their Bible contains 81 books, compared to the 66 books in most Protestant Bibles, or the 73 books in the Catholic Bible. The Book of Enoch, which they call Enoch, is just one of the additional books in the Ethiopian Bible. They also include other books that most churches rejected, such as the Book of Jubilees, which retells many of the stories from Genesis with additional details. For Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, the Book of Enoch is not just an interesting historical document or a book that contains some helpful ideas. It is part of God's inspired word, just as much as Genesis or the Gospel of Matthew. They read from it in their worship services, they quote from it in their teaching, and they consider its stories to be historically true. This means that Ethiopian Orthodox Christians have a somewhat different understanding of some biblical events than other Christians do. They know the names of the fallen angels who came down to earth before the flood. They have detailed knowledge about what heaven looks like and how it is organized. They understand the origin of evil in terms of the story of the Watchers, rather than focusing only on the story of Adam and Eve. The Ethiopian Church's decision to include the Book of Enoch was not made lightly. They have ancient traditions that trace back many centuries, and these traditions have always included the Book of Enoch as an authentic and valuable part of divine revelation. Ethiopian scholars and church leaders have their own reasons for believing that the Book of Enoch is authentic. They point out that the book was clearly known and respected in the early Christian church, as evidenced by the fact that it is quoted in the New Testament book of Jude. They argue that just because the book was lost in most parts of the world does not mean it is not genuine. They also argue that the book's detailed knowledge of astronomy and its sophisticated understanding of theological questions show that it was written by someone with special divine inspiration. They see the elaborate descriptions of heaven and the detailed information about angels as evidence that the writer really did have supernatural experiences. Ethiopian Christians also point out that their church preserved many ancient Christian traditions that were lost elsewhere. They maintained Christian practices and beliefs through centuries of isolation and persecution. They argue that their preservation of the Book of Enoch is another example of how they maintained authentic early Christian traditions that other churches abandoned. It is worth noting that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is not a small or insignificant church. It is one of the oldest Christian churches in the world, and it has millions of members. Their decision to include the Book of Enoch in their Bible is not the choice of a small sect or an unusual group, but the official position of a major Christian denomination with a long and respected history. There are also some other smaller churches and Christian communities that accept the Book of Enoch, though usually not as part of their official biblical canon. Some of these groups are found in other parts of Africa, where there has been Ethiopian influence. Others are found in various parts of the world where people have rediscovered the Book of Enoch and decided that it contains valuable spiritual truths. In recent years, there has been growing interest in the Book of Enoch among some Christians in Europe and North America. This is partly because the book was not widely available in English until relatively recently, and partly because some people are attracted to its elaborate descriptions of supernatural events and its detailed explanations of spiritual mysteries. Some of these modern readers argue that the early church made a mistake when it decided not to include the Book of Enoch in the Bible. They believe that important spiritual truths were lost when this book was excluded, and they think that modern Christians would benefit from reading and studying it. However, it is important to note that most mainstream Christian denominations continue to maintain their historical position that the Book of Enoch, while potentially valuable for historical and cultural study, is not part of the inspired biblical canon. The existence of churches that do include the Book of Enoch raises important questions about religious authority and about how different Christian communities make decisions about sacred texts. It reminds us that Christianity has always been diverse, with different communities sometimes reaching different conclusions about important theological questions. It also reminds us that the formation of the biblical canon was a historical process carried out by human beings, even though Christians believe that God guided this process. Different groups of Christians, all seeking to be faithful to God and to preserve authentic divine revelation, sometimes reach different conclusions. For Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, the Book of Enoch is simply part of their Bible, and they do not understand why other Christians would question its authenticity or value. For most other Christians, the Book of Enoch is an interesting historical document that may contain some valuable insights, but it is not considered to be God's inspired word, in the same way that the books of the standard biblical canon are. This difference of opinion has existed for many centuries, and it is likely to continue. It provides an interesting example of how sincere, faithful Christians can sometimes disagree about important questions while still maintaining their common commitment to following Jesus Christ and living according to God's will. The big differences in what they teach. Now that we understand the history and background of both the Bible and the Book of Enoch, we can look more carefully at the specific differences in what these books teach. While they share some common themes and values, they also present some significantly different views about God, humanity, evil, and salvation. One of the most important differences is in how the two books explain the origin of evil and suffering in the world. This is one of the biggest questions that religion tries to answer. If God is good and all-powerful, why is there so much pain and wickedness in the world? The Bible's main answer to this question comes in the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. According to this account, God created humans with the ability to choose between good and evil. He gave them one simple command. They could eat from every tree in the garden except one. When they chose to disobey this command, sin entered the world and affected all of creation. This explanation puts the responsibility for evil squarely on human shoulders. Humans had a choice, and they chose wrongly. The pain and suffering we see in the world today are the consequences of that original choice. and of all the wrong choices that humans have made since then. The Book of Enoch gives a very different explanation. According to this book, humans were originally innocent and remained innocent for a long time. Evil came into the world because 200 angels chose to leave heaven, marry human women, and teach humans knowledge that they were not supposed to have. In this explanation, humans are more like victims than perpetrators. They were corrupted by supernatural beings who introduced them to violence, magic, vanity, and other forms of wickedness. While humans certainly participated in evil once they learned about it, they were not the original source of the problem. These different explanations lead to different views about human nature and responsibility. The Bible tends to emphasize that humans are capable of both good and evil, and that we must take responsibility for our choices. The Book of Enoch tends to emphasize that humans are vulnerable to supernatural influences, and that much of the evil in the world comes from spiritual forces beyond human control. Another major difference is in how the books describe the spiritual world. The Bible certainly talks about angels and supernatural events, but it usually does not give us elaborate details about how the heavenly realm is organized or what different angels look like. When the Bible mentions angels, it usually focuses on what they do rather than on what they are. Angels bring messages from God. They protect people. They carry out God's judgments, and they worship God. But we are not usually told their names, their specific ranks, or detailed descriptions of their appearance. The Book of Enoch, on the other hand, provides incredibly detailed information about the spiritual world. It gives us the names of many specific angels and describes their particular jobs and responsibilities. It describes different levels of heaven and different categories of spiritual beings. It provides elaborate descriptions of what angels look like and how they relate to each other. This difference affects how readers think about the relationship between the physical world and the spiritual world. The Bible tends to present these as closely connected, with God and his angels actively involved in earthly events, but without a lot of detail about the mechanics of how this involvement works. The Book of Enoch presents a much more complex and detailed picture of spiritual reality. After reading it, a person might come away with the impression that there are elaborate spiritual hierarchies and complex supernatural systems that control everything that happens in the physical world. The two books also differ in their approach to prophecy and future events. The Bible contains many prophecies, but they are usually given in symbolic or general terms that require interpretation. When the prophet Daniel sees visions of future kingdoms, they are represented by strange beasts and symbolic images. When Jesus talks about his second coming, he uses parables and metaphors that convey important truths without giving specific details about exactly when or how events will unfold. The Book of Enoch tends to be much more specific and detailed in its prophecies. It provides elaborate descriptions of future events, including detailed accounts of the final judgment and the establishment of God's kingdom. It presents these prophecies as if Enoch had actually witnessed these future events during his heavenly journeys. This difference affects how readers approach questions about the future. Bible readers often understand that prophecy requires careful interpretation and that some aspects of God's future plans may remain mysterious until they actually happen. Readers of the Book of Enoch might expect more specific and detailed knowledge about future events. There are also differences in how the books approach practical Christian living. The Bible spends a lot of time on practical matters like how to treat other people, how to handle money, how to resolve conflicts, how to deal with suffering, and how to live in community with other believers. While the Book of Enoch does contain moral teaching, it is more focused on cosmic and supernatural matters. It spends much more time describing heavenly journeys and angelic encounters than it does on everyday practical advice for human living. This difference affects how the books might be used in religious education and spiritual guidance. The Bible provides clear, practical guidance for many of the situations that people face in daily life. The Book of Enoch provides fascinating information about supernatural realities, but less direct guidance for practical living. Another significant difference is in how the books present religious authority. Most Bible books do not spend a lot of time establishing the credentials of their writers or trying to convince readers that they should be believed. The writers usually just present their messages and let the content speak for itself. The Book of Enoch, on the other hand, spends considerable time establishing Enoch's special authority as someone who has had unique supernatural experiences. It emphasizes that Enoch was specially chosen by God to receive revelations that were not given to other humans. This difference might affect how readers think about religious authority in general. Bible readers might be more likely to test religious claims against the overall teaching of Scripture and against their own experience and reason. Readers of the Book of Enoch might be more impressed by claims of special revelation or unique spiritual experiences. Finally, there are differences in how the books present the character of God. Both books clearly teach that God is holy, just, and all-powerful, but they emphasize different aspects of God's character. The Bible presents God as someone who is intimately involved with human beings and human history. God calls Abraham to be the father of a special nation. God rescues the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. God becomes human in the person of Jesus Christ. Even when God judges sin, it is usually in the context of his ongoing relationship with humanity. The Book of Enoch presents God as more remote and transcendent. God lives in an elaborate heavenly palace surrounded by complex hierarchies of angels. While God is certainly concerned about justice and righteousness, he seems more distant from everyday human experience. Most of God's interaction with humanity happens through intermediary angels, rather than through direct personal relationship. These different emphases might affect how readers think about prayer, worship, and their personal relationship with God. Bible readers might be more likely to think of God as personally accessible and interested in the details of their daily lives. Readers of the Book of Enoch might be more aware of God's transcendent majesty, but less confident about approaching him directly. All of these differences help explain why most Christian churches decided not to include the Book of Enoch in their Bible. While the book certainly contains some valuable spiritual insights, Its overall approach to these fundamental theological questions is different enough from the Bible that church leaders were concerned about potential confusion or contradiction. How these books influenced the world. The story of the Bible and the Book of Enoch is not just about ancient books and old theological debates. These texts have had enormous influence on human civilization, affecting everything from art and literature to science and politics. Understanding this influence helps us see why these books continue to matter today. The Bible's influence on world civilization is so vast that it is hard to summarize. It has been translated into more languages than any other book in history. It has shaped the laws, customs, and cultures of many nations. It has inspired countless works of art, music, and literature. It has motivated people to build hospitals, schools, and charitable organizations. It has also, unfortunately, sometimes been used to justify war, oppression, and discrimination. In the Western world, the Bible provided the foundation for much of what we consider to be basic moral and ethical principles. Ideas about human dignity, equal rights, care for the poor and suffering, and the importance of truth and justice all have deep roots in biblical teaching. The Bible also had a profound impact on the development of education and literacy. Because Christians believed that everyone should be able to read the Bible for themselves, churches established schools and promoted literacy wherever Christianity spread. Many of the world's oldest universities were founded by Christians who wanted to train people to study and teach biblical truth. The influence of the Book of Enoch has been much more limited, but it has still been significant in certain areas. During the centuries when the book was lost to most of the world, its influence was mainly preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and in some Jewish mystical traditions. But when the Book of Enoch was rediscovered and translated into European languages in the 1700s and 1800s, it had a surprising impact on Western culture. Writers and artists were fascinated by its elaborate descriptions of fallen angels and cosmic battles between good and evil. One of the most famous examples of this influence is John Milton's epic poem, Paradise Lost, which tells the story of Satan's rebellion against God and the fall of Adam and Eve. While Milton based his poem primarily on the Bible, he also drew ideas from the Book of Enoch, especially for his descriptions of the fallen angels and their motivations. The Book of Enoch also influenced the development of what scholars call apocalyptic literature, writing that deals with the end times and the final battle between good and evil. This type of literature became very popular in certain periods of history, especially during times of persecution or social upheaval. In more recent times, the Book of Enoch has found new audiences among people interested in UFOs and ancient astronauts. Some people have interpreted the book's descriptions of the Watchers coming down from heaven as evidence that Earth was visited by beings from other planets in ancient times. While this interpretation is not accepted by mainstream scholars, it shows how ancient texts can be reinterpreted in light of modern ideas and concerns. The book has also influenced modern fantasy and science fiction literature. Authors writing about angels, demons, cosmic battles, and supernatural journeys often draw inspiration from the elaborate descriptions found in the Book of Enoch. Readers of fantasy novels and viewers of supernatural movies are often encountering ideas that ultimately trace back to this ancient text, even if they do not realize it. Both the Bible and the Book of Enoch have also had important influences on how people think about the relationship between science and religion. The Bible's account of creation has been the subject of extensive debate as scientific understanding of the universe has developed. Some people see conflicts between biblical teaching and scientific discoveries, while others find ways to harmonize the two. The Book of Enoch presents some additional complications in this area. Its detailed descriptions of astronomical phenomena sometimes conflict with what we now know about how the solar system actually works. Its accounts of giants and supernatural beings are difficult to reconcile with modern understanding of history and archaeology. For people who accept the Book of Enoch as divinely inspired, these conflicts can create challenges similar to those faced by people trying to reconcile the Bible with modern science. For people who view the Book of Enoch as an interesting historical document, but not as literal truth, these conflicts are less problematic. The different fates of these two books also illustrate important principles about how religious authority develops and how communities decide which teachings to accept. The Bible's inclusion in the canon of most Christian churches gave it a level of authority and influence that the Book of Enoch never achieved. This difference in authority has had practical consequences throughout history. When Christian missionaries went to other countries, they brought the Bible with them and translated it into local languages. But they usually did not bring the Book of Enoch, so most people around the world never had the opportunity to read it or be influenced by it. This pattern shows how decisions made by religious authorities can have far-reaching consequences that extend far beyond the religious community itself. When church leaders decided that the Bible should be the standard for Christian teaching, they were also deciding which ideas and stories would have the opportunity to influence world civilization. In the academic world, both books continue to be important subjects of study. Biblical scholarship is a huge field involving thousands of scholars around the world who study the Bible's history, languages, cultural background, and interpretation. This scholarly work has helped us understand not just what the Bible says, but also how it was written, how it was preserved, and how it has been understood by different people in different times and places. Scholarship on the Book of Enoch is much smaller, but still significant. Scholars study this book to understand the development of Jewish and Christian thought during the centuries before and after the time of Jesus. The book provides valuable insights into how ancient people thought about angels, evil, judgment, and the afterlife. This scholarly work on both books has sometimes challenged traditional interpretations and raised new questions about their meaning and significance. For example, scholarly study of the Bible has helped us understand more about the historical and cultural contexts in which different Bible books were written. This has sometimes led to new interpretations of familiar passages. Similarly, scholarly study of the Book of Enoch has helped us understand more about the religious and intellectual world in which early Christianity developed. This has given us new insights into some of the ideas and concerns that influence the writers of the New Testament. Looking at the influence of these books also helps us understand something important about how ideas spread and develop over time. The Bible's ideas about love, justice, forgiveness, and human dignity have spread around the world and have been adopted even by people who do not consider themselves Christians. These ideas have become part of the common heritage of humanity. The Book of Enoch's ideas about cosmic battles between good and evil, about the corruption of the world by supernatural forces, and about detailed hierarchies of spiritual beings have also spread, but in more limited ways. They have influenced certain streams of religious and literary thought, but they have not become part of mainstream human culture in the same way that biblical ideas have. This difference in influence raises interesting questions about why some ideas spread widely while others remain more specialized. It may be that the Bible's focus on practical human concerns and relationships makes its ideas more universally applicable, while the Book of Enoch's focus on supernatural mysteries makes it more appealing to people with specialized interests. Or it may simply be that historical circumstances gave the Bible more opportunities to spread and influence human culture. If the Book of Enoch had been included in the biblical canon, or if it had not been lost for so many centuries, its influence might have been very different. The modern discovery and what it means today. The rediscovery of the Book of Enoch in modern times is one of the most exciting stories in the history of biblical scholarship. For over 1,000 years, this book existed only in rumors and fragments. Most scholars thought it was lost forever. Then, in a dramatic turn of events that reads like an adventure novel, explorers found complete copies hidden away in the mountains of Ethiopia. The story begins in the 1760s when a Scottish explorer named James Bruce was traveling through Ethiopia. Bruce was not looking for ancient books. He was trying to find the source of the Nile River. But during his travels, he encountered Ethiopian Orthodox monks who showed him manuscripts of books that were completely unknown in Europe. One of these manuscripts was a complete copy of the Book of Enoch in the Ethiopian language, called Ge'ez. Bruce realized that this was an incredible discovery. He had found a book that had been quoted in the New Testament, but had been lost to the Western world for over 1,000 years. Bruce brought 3 copies of the Book of Enoch back to Europe with him. When scholars began to study and translate these manuscripts, they could hardly believe what they were reading. Here was a book that provided detailed background for some of the mysterious passages in the Bible. Here were the sources for some of the ideas about angels and giants that had puzzled biblical scholars for centuries. The discovery created a sensation in academic circles. Scholars rushed to study the book and understand its significance. They began to see connections between the Book of Enoch and other ancient Jewish and Christian writings. They realized that this book had been an important influence on the development of early Christian thought, even though it had been excluded from the biblical canon.